eGlobal Author Salon session on AI-Prose Generation, Sudowrite, Claude, and ChatGPT. My name is Marigold, and I am a North American author who kind of dabbles in script writing, fiction, and poetry. How about you, Cece?
This CC coming at you from Texas.
So, as stated, we're going to be using Sudowrite, Claude, and ChatGPT today. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time inside of, say, Claude or ChatGPT, at least not when it comes to the prose generation. We will go ahead and model that for you so that you can see what that looks like with the prompts. But our main focus is going to be on generating prose within Sudowrite today. Now, this workshop is going to dive deep into the capabilities of these language models. And we want to showcase how each can be harnessed for guiding your prose. We want you to be able to create your prose the way you would like to see it grace the page. From storylines to character dialogue, I really want to focus on those aspects of writing. When I think of dialogue, it's the heart of being able to convey who your character is, being able to give your character some flavor. So, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that when we get into Sudowrite, into Story Engine. Today, what will you learn? We're going to touch upon the AI landscape, as I stated. We're going to be playing around in Sudowrite, Claude, and ChatGPT. We're going to guide our prose, and we're going to optimize some of the functionality of the LLM. We're also going to do a comparative analysis between the three different models. So we can take a look at the different prose that we generate in Sudowrite, Claude, and ChatGPT. We can take a look at what that prose difference looks like. Now, I know that y'all have been seeing this tried and true formula, and I've really been drilling home that I like to use this formula to find the guts of what my story is, especially if you're having a hard time trying to figure out how to tell somebody in one or two sentences what your story is about. Because there's nothing worse than being in the grocery store or being at the dentist office or doctor office or at a school or wherever you may be, work, and having somebody say, "What is your book about?" And you know your story and it's all floating around in your head. And you start to talk to them, and 30 minutes later, you're only maybe 3 chapters in. Practice using this formula so that you can give somebody a bird's eye view of what your body of work looks like. Now, today we're actually using this prompt a little bit different. Today, we're using this prompt to drill down into a chapter. So if you already have your chapter beats written, or say you already have a chapter written, then you can actually copy all of those chapter beats or your existing chapter, and you can use this prompt to get to the heart of what that chapter is about. So as you can see, I went ahead and did that for chapter 1. And it gave me when Laura Solis discovers an old signpost in Central Park, eerily connected to her mother's past. She must unravel the mysteries of her family lineage before the blossoming mark on her arm reaches full bloom. Because the enigmatic stranger, this is her love interest, may be more intertwined with her fate than she realizes, and her very identity could be at stake if she fails to decipher the clues in time. So that kind of gives me a bird's eye view of what my chapter is about. So if you're having a conversation, say with an editor or somebody, you already know at a quick glance if somebody says, "Hey, what is chapter 1 about?" You can actually pull that in. Now, will it hit the heart of what you think it is sometimes? Maybe not, but this is a great exercise, whether you are using AI or not. So I went ahead and ran it on chapter 2, which you see when the boundaries between the hidden realm and the human world begin to blur. Eolan, drawn to the mysterious aurora surrounding Laura, must uncover the source of these anomalies and guard his secrets. because Voss, ever watchful and probing, threatens to expose his clandestine visit to the human world, which could endanger both realms and their fragile balance. So, again, you can do this for every single chapter. Now, one of the things that I found interesting whenever I was doing this is if somebody tells you, hey, I need you to give me a chapter outline, whole outline, chapter by chapter of your body of work, this is a good way to do it. And I find that it's a nice little training aid for you to understand how to drill down into that chapter. Are there any questions on using this prompt?
There's one in chat from Nina. When you use the term antagonistic force, it could be not a villain mystery if it's character arc focus. It could be a negative force.
That is correct. It could be, I don't know if y'all are familiar with the movie Twister. The tornado was an antagonistic force. Any of those movies where you've seen the volcano that is launching, where you might find that there's an ice age looming and humanity's at risk, or say that there's a Cold War, it can be any type of antagonistic force. Nature could be that antagonistic force.
Internal conflict too.
Yes, very much. Cece, is there anything that you would like to add to that?
That was it.
Excuse me. Apologize, guys. So now that we've had this little discussion, let's play inside of ChatGPT. I want to show y'all some of the things that I did in there. So in chat, you will actually recognize some of this content. So let's go ahead and take a look at our eGlobal. So I actually used these specific prompts here inside of ChatGPT 4. You can do this inside of 3 and it will function for you, but I do tend to find that 4 gives me a little bit better drill down into the content. Now, if you do not have ChatGPT 4 and you are using, say, Claude, this same content will work inside of Claude as well. Now, one of the things that I do want to point out is that say you have a romance and maybe it might be on the spicier side. And if you are using your beats and it has some heated content, some sexual content, or even if you're writing, say, an action adventure or a horror movie or a book, and it has content in there that might hit that censorship and it may stump Claude or ChatGPT 4 or another LLM that you're using. One of the ways that I get around that is to go in and find an area that might have the word sex or find an area that might reflect carnage. And I will pare that out of that part of the beat. And I might write that battle conflict escalates, or I might say romantic encounter. And whenever I do that, it keeps it from being blocked and I can still get my information that way. Now, that just means that if I take that information into, say, Story Engines, which is a product of Sudowrite, if I take that information forward, then I'm going to have to alter my beats again. I'm going to have to dress them up so that I can get the content that I want out of Sudowrite Story Engine. So let's go ahead and take a look at what I asked ChatGPT to do. So I asked I said, turn this into a generic prompt framework that I can use with any story as a prompt. Now, today I'm actually providing you with this same prompt, and you'll notice that it has Laura and the love interest listed. It has some basic information about these characters. I want you to know how to take this prompt, turn it into a generic body so that you can take that framework and you can use it from book to book. So, one of the ways that you do that is by asking it to strip everything out of it and just make it a generic template. So, that is what I have done here. So, Chat GPT-4 gave it to me. You notice that it's a character development of character 1 and character 2. Now, depending on your genre, it will go ahead and change some of these percentages depending on what the need of your story is. So, one of the things that I want to do today is show you how you would actually use this prompt. So, I'm going to take this generic prompt and I'm going to copy it. I'm going to place it right back down in here, scroll down, and I'm going to grab one of my chapters. So, give me just a minute to grab a chapter. We did chapter one prior, so let's play with chapter two. And as you can see, this is chapter two, and I'm going to go ahead and grab that.
And while you're pasting, Jacob wants to know how many genres you can give before it gets overwhelmed.
I would give the I would give the basic genre and then list the subgenres. I've not had it bulk. I've not had it not perform. So I have been able to use multiple subgenres with my main genre. Now, say you have a blending of a genre, maybe you have a fantasy, but yet you have that hybrid of fantasy with science fiction, and maybe it has a little bit of mystery or thriller thrown in, then just go ahead and name that a science fiction fantasy thriller. And then you can even at some point add a little bit of extra information in there if you have a very specific subgenre. Remember what this prompt is going to do when you put it into ChatGPT 4 or Claude. It's going to look at your chapter or your chapter beats, and then it's going to wrap that information inside.
And Nina mentioned that she uses a hybrid genre mix of three genres, so it gives her a fused percentage.
Oh, nice. And it is nice when it will give you some of those very specific details. I'm going to paste something here so that y'all can take a look at that. And I'm going to actually use that same prompt that I just put inside of chat. It's saying, keep in mind the current story. I want you to change and convert this framework into a framework that I can use across, I can say the first three chapters or even the whole book if I'm looking at the whole chain within ChatGPT 4, or I can drill down and say that I can use for chapter one or a single chapter. So I tend to alter all of my prompts right on the fly whenever I am playing around with them in ChatGPT 4. How about you, Cece? Do you find that you alter your prompts off and on throughout the day when you're using them?
I alter my prompts with every chapter.
Nice. So I've already told it this. Now, sometimes it will inadvertently try to write the chapter, or it might give it to me in a non-JSON form. So I am going to ask it to give it to me in JSON form.
And the reason for altering them for every single chapter is because different chapters will have different tones, goals. We might find ourselves accentuating a romance scene or a fight scene. I have to make sure that the directions to the AI match the scene or the chapter. I typically work in scenes, which it calls chapters, but I don't treat them like chapters because I might put two of them together and make them into a chapter, or I might keep them separate, just depending.
And to Cece's point, there are times where half of my chapter might be a planning stage. Maybe if my characters are going to battle, maybe that first section of my chapter might be about them finalizing their plan. And then maybe that second or the last two-thirds of that chapter might be the actual battle scene that is extremely active with combat hand to hand. In that instance, I would go ahead and break that up because those are two completely different scenes within one chapter. So I would break those up and I would actually run this story element framework on the individual scenes, just so that I knew that I was capturing the essence of that specific scene within that chapter.
So Nina has a question.
Yes.
She says, for example, your prompts for that particular chapter do not include the character for the romance Do you believe it'll repurpose the romance percentage to other sections, or do you change it to 0%?
Sometimes it will change it to a lower percentage, which I'm fine with. And then if I know that my character is in there in that chapter, it will up it. Now, there's nothing saying that if I have an early chapter and I don't want my characters to just all of a sudden fall in love and get married or have a surprise baby, I then play around with those percentages because even though I am asking Chat to provide that information for me, it doesn't always mean that I'm going to agree with Chat. Chat is just my writing resource. He's really not even my partner. He's not even my junior writing partner. Chat is 100% my resource. Like I use maybe Grammarly to help me sharpen my body of work or Pro Writing Aid. It's even similar to the resource that I use as Vellum for formatting. Chat does so much more, but it takes me to tell it what to do. So as you can see, I did ask it to be very specific, and I don't know. I think we're having some weirdness here, but I'm going to have to take a look at this because it looks like the beats, it listed them individually, but it is hinting on what needs to be done in each beat. When I get something this long on the beats themselves, because remember, it's reading the beats, I would need to make sure that I go in and take a look at this to make sure that it is not ingraining something that I don't agree with. Now, if you notice that each one of these lines where you see the parenthesis, that is unique to the specific scene that it was looking at. So if I have 10 beats, I'm going to have 10 of these. If I have 14, I'm going to have 14 of these. Now, does the LLM always do this for every single beat? No, not always. Sometimes it will just give an overview there, but in this case, Chat felt that it needed to break it up to give specifics on them. Now, here it does give me the character development. It is hitting at 20 to 25%. The world building has amped up there. We can go down and take a look at the other aspects. Now, do you notice here? I still have a 10 to 15%, but I don't have he can talk about her, but she's not going to end up coming up in this chapter. Now, it's very rare when I run these for me to have one of the characters pop up when they're not listed. I find that it's a much smoother process when I am giving the AI the characters that are involved, the characters that I have within my chapter. So this is how I do my framework. I'm going to copy this and let's go ahead and take it into Sudowrite. And again, I'm bringing 100% of my content into Sudowrite Story Engine. If you take a look, you can see I have absolutely nothing at all on the left side. I have nothing in the brain dump, the genre, the style. I have nothing in my synopsis, nothing in my character list. My outline, I am going to add something. And remember yesterday how I showed y'all how to activate that? I'm going to show you again just as a refresher. Cece, is there anything that you wanted to add to this today?
Not right now, maybe get a little bit further in the process.
So all I have to do is basically type any character, and there it is. My card has been activated for section 1. Now I do want to add another card. Notice how I only have one part. So I'm going to come down underneath that H, and I'm just going to type in chapter 2 and H.
And don't forget the template that I gave you guys yesterday. You can copy a couple of lines out of that and drop it in here. I think it was either yesterday or the day before.
So notice how I now have my chapter information. I do have chapter 2. I have my POV. Now notice how it differs a little bit, but it's still the same. Yesterday, when it did my first chapter summary, it has the POV and then it lists Laura. Today, it did it a little bit different, but it still gave me the same information. Now it's letting me know who my characters are. So I know who's in the story. Same thing yesterday. It gave me all of my characters. It has given me my setting, transitions. So I have the same information. I have the same story element content. It's just that it is broken down a little bit different because of the needs of my chapter. So now let's go ahead and go in and grab our second chapter. I'm going to grab all of those beats. And now I'm going to come down here and I'm going to plug those in. Now, because I have all of the information that I need wrapped into my template in that framework, I'm going to delete this top section right there. And I'm going to remove where it says beats. Now, one of the things that I like to do is a really quick glance over my content that I have in my card, because one, I want to make sure that you see this number one right here. That is the first beat in my sequence of 14. So I'm going to scroll up. I'm going to make sure that I don't have anything at all within my framework that has a number one at the first part of that sentence or that segment or paragraph. Because if I have a number one anywhere there, it could actually mess up my process. So I want to show you something. I've heard from people who use Sudowrite Story Engine that I don't know why I only had 12 beats, but for some reason it just generated like 98 different beats. It just kept going and going. Let me show you how that happens. So come here down to the bottom of your beat card and you will see check beats. I can check my beats and everything that is an instruction should fall right underneath your header. So let's scroll down. We see all of the framework is showing up. We can see all this information here going all the way down. We see that all of the information in this top section is all the header. It's all my instruction. The only thing that should be showing up in your beats is 100% only your beats. If you see any of your beats up inside of the header, or if you see some of your header instructions down here in your beat section, then you know that it's not going to generate correct. So let me show you what it will look like if you end up with additional stuff inside of your header. So I'm going to come over here and you know what? Let's go ahead and put a number one right here. And let's scroll down. So that means that everything below that number one is going to shift. Do you see how that shifted? That means that when Story Engine, if I were to hit the prose and tell it to generate my prose right now, guess what? I would have, let's see how many beats it would try to do. Let's see. Wow, we're already down to 26. We're all the way down to 55. So that is how, if you were generating in Story Engine and you don't catch that, if I were to generate this, it would want to give me 55 beats. It would generate it 55 beats in that prose.
Okay.
And that's not what I want. So make sure that whatever is in your header that is instruction only includes your instructions. Same thing with your beats. So I'm going to hide that. I'm going to remove that number one from right here. Any questions on that?
Nothing in chat.
Okay. I am going to duplicate a card because I was playing with the system last night. I just wanted to see how this OpenAI has been having some issues. And we already know that Sudowrite Story Engine pulls from either prose from either Claude or from GPT. So I wanted to make sure that there weren't any oddities showing up last night. So I did go ahead and generate pretty late last night, but I will regenerate again today just so that y'all can see what that looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the content that we generated yesterday for chapter one. And as you can see, I have the same content, the same word count from what I generated yesterday, and I'm going to scroll down. I'm definitely 100% always going to check that my header has only my instructions and that my beats only have my beats. So I have only 14 here. I can go ahead and hide my checker. And before I hit generate, are there any questions?
Not in chat.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and use most accurate. Everybody has a preference or an idea of what prose they prefer. If you are using most accurate, it's going to pull from GPT. If you are using best prose, that is actually pulling from Claude. If you are using fastest, that is going to be GPT 3.5. I prefer most accurate, but that is a personal choice for me. So whether one is better than the other, that's subjective. So if you like best prose, or even if you like what inside of Claude, then you may prefer best prose. If you prefer working with Chat GPT 4 or GPT, then you may prefer most accurate. Cece, do you have a preference?
I always use most accurate. I know there are some people that like to generate in either 2 or 3 of the LLMs or most accurate and best prose, etcetera, and then they like to stitch them together. That sounds like a lot of work to me. It's not something I'd ever be interested in doing. I simply, if it needs fixing, I fix it. That's it. Hey, we have a question in chat.
Okay.
Whoa. Ciaran says, just curious, when generating beats, or even if I create beats myself, would it help or hurt if I put the rough word count for each beat?
Chat or Claude will not necessarily follow the word count. You can by all means put that in there, but my experience, my personal experience is that it's really not going to pay attention to word count. Now, one thing that I have noticed on word count is that on typical average, depending on which way the wind is blowing for the LLM, I can generally get about 400 words on average whenever I am generating. And to Mimi's point, yeah, I don't think the models really do know how to count. I think that it being more of a predictive index, that it is generating and providing those words based on the pattern that it sees. Now, I can tell you right now, I preferred the way that the LLM was working last night than the way it is generating today. Now, why do I say that? If you take a comparison and you look at what generated yesterday, which this section here on the right is what generated last night, and today, this is what generated on the left. Yesterday, it gave me more of that dialogue. I had less of those nice, nifty little ties and bows. I had less of those last night when I was generating, and I have more of those longer winded segments here today in my generation. It doesn't mean that it's going to keep doing it, but it could potentially give me more paragraph or more narrative today. One of the things that I have found is that if I log out and then come back in, if I get a different server, I might find that I have completely different wording, and I'm okay with that.
Hey, can you take a quick second to show them how you would mark at the top of the first stride that this is most accurate or best prose so that they can know that when it transfers over, when they transfer it over, send to doc or whatever they call that feature, how it would also transfer over. That everybody, you would simply put this right here. Doesn't mess with anything. You still got to clean up that stride, but you can see what it is. You can put your date. You can put your version. You can put whatever you need to put. I also sometimes put the chapter in there if it helps me up at the top. It's your call. Oh, and on that note, I have a few things to read for you. Marigold, if you got a second, is this a good time?
Let me point out one thing real quick.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
you want to report one of these parts in Story Engine, then you need to make sure that you are clicking on the little thumbs up or down before you type anything at all inside of that card. Because the moment you do, your thumbs go away. So you have no way to report something to them. So, say I wanted to report something was disappointing, I would need to do that before I clicked into my prose to write anything in there. Because the minute I click in there, I no longer have the ability to give it a thumbs up or thumbs down. You see it, well, it shows a thumb down, but I'm going to give it a thumbs up. And, but if I had clicked on there like I did on this card from yesterday, you notice I don't have that ability now. So keep that in mind.
Okay.
What was the question?
So Nina says she sees some differences in this framework and story elements than another one she had from you. For
Yeah.
example, the addition of elements, and maybe she's just wondering if she didn't copy them correctly. Can you speak to that at all? Do you know?
Which framework did you pull from? Because we did have an example yesterday, and I have sent CC has another framework. When I went in and stripped everything out, I have the stripped out framework that I can share with y'all today as well. So are you talking about the framework from yesterday or from a complete go
It
ahead?
might have been from more than, like, maybe 2 days ago. I just don't recall the character voice framework pieces being in there, as well as the themes and tropes piece being in there, and just was wondering about that.
I believe
Maybe I just missed.
I believe it was at the very bottom. So if you go into, I believe it was either here, let me look at my list. I thought that was yesterday's framework, and you should be able to find that right in the middle in between some of the other prompts. It would be after the really long framework, but before the extra prompts that says 1, 2, and 3. However, the content that I'm using today with the generic framework, I'll be sharing that generic framework with y'all today because that generic one will allow you to take it and wrap it to any one of your bodies of work, regardless of genre.
You have a couple of comments and then a question. So Jacob mentions that if you ask for 1,000 words, he gets 500 to 700. It just depends on the prompts and the info you give it. So Nina says, and as well, if you're generated prose a second time or a third time, she's seeing big differences.
Yes.
Sierra says, on average, how many versions would you normally need to generate before it gets to the best result you're looking for?
So the only reason why I did 2 results right now is because I wanted to show y'all that depending on when you generate your prose, it's not going to give you the same prose each time. I could generate 50 times and never get the same generation. Now, will it have the same backstory to my chapter? You betcha 100%. The only difference is that it would be different on the way that the information is actually being put on the page, but it will be following my beats. Now, how many generations do I do? I don't like to kit bash, and I think it's great that other people do that. And if that is a process that works for you and it's tried and true for you, 100% stay with that. For me, that would be so overwhelming for me. And I'd like to know that I only have one chapter to look at rather than having to take and edit 3 chapters and put them together. I only want to edit one manuscript. So I was talking to an author about this, and Cece was on the call with us. I think it was a Zoom in Discord within our AI writers. And it was funny because the author was saying, I love what I get out of all 3 models. So this individual likes to go ahead and process most accurate, best prose, and fastest. And then she will kit bash, which is a term that Elizabeth Ann West has coined for how you take 3 different versions of something and kind of merge or bash them together. She takes those and she takes all 3 of those separate siloed manuscripts for the same body of work and she will merge them together. into one manuscript. And I told her, my gosh, that would just drive me crazy because by the time I finished doing all that kit bashing, I would have one body of work, but I would have done the work of editing 4 manuscripts because each one of those, if I generate my whole book in fastest, best prose, and most accurate, I have 3 manuscripts, and I'm gonna turn those 3 manuscripts into 1 manuscript, and I'm telling I would be pulling out my hair because I'm very OCD, and to see all of that, that would just, like, freak me out, and the author was laughing and telling me, "Oh, no, I like all the choices." It comes down to a personal choice, and what works for one author may not work for another. I would find that overwhelming, but there are other authors who like those choices. And yes, Ingrid, most accurate can get dense, but as a writer, I prefer what I see in most accurate because it basically follows the flow of my beats better. And as a writer, I'm going to go in there. And if I feel that it is too narrative heavy and dense or bloated, I'm going to remove that content. And then I am going to go in and add my voice to it. If there is something that I don't like at the way that it is said, that the prose has generated, I'm going to go in and I am going to make that change myself. How about you, CC? What is your process there?
Always use most accurate. I only use most accurate typically, and then I edit it to add my voice. But here's a couple thoughts, y'all. First
Okay.
of all, it depends on the genre you're writing, I think, because all 3 of these have different voices. One might lend better to, say, historical fiction, historical romance. Another might lend better to action or urban fantasy or anything of that nature. And so I would encourage you, when you're getting ready to start a series, perhaps even with a new pen name, to run it once in each one to see which voice you prefer and would work with your genre and the style that you want. And then after that, I would tell you, use the same choice every time. Either it's best prose or it's most accurate. Use the same one every time for consistency of voice because it's maybe that answer should be obvious, but you should have a consistent voice throughout your book.
Yes.
So I think that's really all I had to add to it.
And I'm glad that you said something because it reminded me that one, putting this little note here that CC had told me, hey, don't forget to put that in there. That's something that comes second nature to me. But because I never change the model and I never generate on the other two, again, that's my stylistic choice. And like she said, what works for one writer may not work for another. It's subjective. Now you notice that if I've already generated this on most accurate. I've generated the first card I did last night on most accurate. If I come in and I created another duplicate of section 1, part 1, which is chapter 1, and you notice that if I come in here and hit best prose, guess what? It changes all of the cards. So if you don't know which one you used and you haven't marked it, then you may not remember which one of the LLMs you used, especially if you like to use all 3 of them or a combination of them. I never have that issue because I always stay in most accurate. But let's go ahead and see what Best Prose does just so that you can see that comparison. Remember, the first generation that I did today with y'all over here on the left, that was 100% GPT-4. Now we are using Claude through Sudowrite Story Engine. So what you are seeing right now is Claude. Notice how much shorter Claude's content is. So our stride ended here, and I want to say a couple of paragraphs further than what the paragraph ended up here with prose, with the generation of best prose. Now, it is interesting. It did not work as much with my prompt in that first generation today to kill some of those bows and ties. It worked last night with my strides. If you notice, I end on dialogue and I start with something that is more active on that 3/4 beats, which is my second stride, I end with something here, even though it said this did not bode well, I can live with that. Do I prefer one over the other? Yes, I still prefer the most accurate. But again, that's my personal preference. But you have to decide which one is best for you. And as you can see, Best Prose is still gathering those words.
Why do I get the feeling you've been talking about me when I come in?
Oh, Lynn, we love you. And yes, that is very true. I am talking about you, Miss Lynn.
Okay.
And she does. She will go in, and I have watched her do some of this process, and I'm like, Lynn, I would be pulling out my hair. And she's like, I like options. I like to have options. I like to know that I have options when it comes to my scenes. And I'm like, your options would drive me just insane. But again, it depends on who what type of style of writing you prefer. Now, Lynn, aren't you a pantser?
I most certainly am.
See, so she likes to have those options. She loves to see which one kind of grabs her and pulls her deeper into the story. Me, on the other hand, I just want one. I just want one chapter. So I'm going to come up here. Before I click in here, let's scroll down to the bottom. And guess what? We have our thumbs down and thumbs up. I have not done anything in here. I have not clicked inside. But the moment I do and I tell it what it is, it's going to take my ability away to provide any type of voting with those fingers or thumbs. Let's scroll down, bloop, and voila, they are gone. So if you are wanting to rate something, make sure you do it before you add any comments or before you edit, because you can actually come right in here and you can edit any of this content. You can even type in there if you want to. I, I have Jasper. If I wanted to, I can activate Jasper, and I can actually, Jasper will write inside of these cards for me. And I've actually done that before. I've actually used Jasper inside of the cards when something didn't finish. I actually used the Jasper plugin here, which I thought was interesting. So let's do one more card before we jet over to play with Claude. Was there anything specific, Cece, that you wanted to see or discuss?
The only thing I'm going to mention, nothing to see, but you see where Mira had put the H in the outline where she was trying to create the opportunity to add more chapters or scenes. Just a side note, you can put something other than just a placeholder H. You can put chapter 1, you can put chapter 2, scene 1, scene 2, etc. I'm simply letting you know this because it's one more chance to, at a quick glance, see what chapter you're on. Because otherwise, you don't know what chapter you're on, because they'll say section 1, part 2. But what if you don't know what it is? Or what if you're in the middle of your book and you decide, oh man, I need a scene to bridge these two scenes together, and you decide to put it in there. Make sure you just mark in that little spot instead of an H, put down what scene this is or what chapter it is. That way you have it right above you and you don't have to figure out at a later date where it is. And you have some things in chat. Is this a bad time to mention them?
No, not at all.
Okay, so Mimi says, can you please show how chapter 2 would go so the SE knows what happened in the chapter before?
Yes, I'm going to show chapter 2. Keep in mind that chapter 1 is from Laura's perspective. Chapter 2 is from the Mel's perspective. So chapter 2 may not exactly pick up where Laura's chapter ended for Laura's ending chapter, and chapter 3, where it begins, will continue Laura's thread. Now, with his, it is going to continue, but from his perspective in chapter 2. So keep that in mind. Now, if this story was all from Laura's perspective, then 100% it would be showing as soon as a chapter ended with chapter 1, it might open with the exact same scene with her in the same mindset. But remember, we are alternating chapters, and we can end a scene in Laura's perspective with her inside of the park. and we see exactly how that ends. And that scene, that chapter 1 scene, ends with her having that sensation on her arm and that birthmark changing. And that's where chapter 1 ends. And chapter 2 is going to end with him still being there, but looking through the veil between the worlds. Now, one of the things that I find interesting with fastest, and we'll get to the next question, take a look at the 3 different lengths. We have best prose, most accurate, and this over here is fastest. I want to show you how sometimes fastest, a lot of people say it always gives you really short content. That's not always true. So we know that this was run on fastest. Take a look at where we already have 3-4 ended on best prose here. 3-4 ended here on the most accurate. Take a look at how long the narrative paragraphs are. And now let's take a look at fastest. And our 3-4 starts down here. So keep in mind, just because it's fastest does not mean that it is going to be shorter than the other 2. Sometimes fastest can give you more content. Take a look at the word count. So 2580 for fastest, 2317 for my most accurate, and over here for prose, the prose for best prose, which is Claude, only gave 1733. Now, does it always do it in that way? No. Sometimes it just depends on what the AI focuses on the beats. Sometimes all of these numbers can be flipped. So now, Nina, if you are trying fastest, I highly recommend that you make sure that your beats are really solid, that there is nothing vague in your beats, and that your beats are active driven, that you have action in there. What were you going to ask, Cece? I'm sorry.
Oh, it's fine. It's fine. There's another question from Nina. She's wondering if you developed this deep header direction process early before SW, or as it was more in beta mode. She wonders how this works alongside other information included in Sudowrite's other boxes. She wonders if there would be conflicts there.
So I talked to so let me start at the very beginning of your first question. The framework that you see here today that I use is actually the way my brain works and how when I'm plotting out prior to AI, this is my mentally for how I sit down and figure out how I'm going to write a chapter. I need to understand what story elements are going to go into that chapter. And so I break down the whole book into a small chunk. It's easier to think about my book by a scene or chapter than to think, oh my gosh, I have 30 chapters that I have to write. I drill it down after I plot everything out to a T. I then go to my chapter and then I further drill down into it with the story elements. And this is why it's so important as a writer for you to understand those story elements. Now, when I was a brand new writer, did I understand those elements? Oh my gosh, no. And I was fortunate that I had a really good editor who actually assumed more of a role of an instructor. And every time she was working on a body of work with me, she actually took the time to tell me, look, you need to focus on this story element. You need to make sure that this is inside of your chapter. And yes, Dion, that was Cece. You will hear more about this tomorrow, but oh my gosh, it was so intense and so much fun. Oh my gosh, she had so much information that she was able to provide, and it just really helped me understand the framework of what went into writing a body of work. It's not just, I have an idea and I sit down to write. There's so much more to it because you have to understand the craft. You have to understand how those story elements come into play. You need to understand how your character development works, how the world building, how the dialogue, the conflict, the tension, the action, the foreshadowing. You need to make sure that romantic development is in there, the backstory, the themes, tropes. There's so many more items that go in there And that's why I'm saying it's so important to understand and constantly grow that craft. Do I know everything? No, I just know a tip of the iceberg. And if I could do like a Vulcan mind melt with CC, man, I'd probably know a whole lot more. But again, I'm constantly learning. And even CC, she'll tell me, hey, I just learned this. You need to take a look at this. And it's amazing. I'm constantly learning and I have a thirst for knowledge. So I always want to learn something new. Now to the AI, I've been talking to some of the Sudowrite developers, a great group of people, and it was really interesting to hear how some of them were looking at me using the JSON and they were saying, "Oh, there's no way that's going to work." And then it worked, and then they said, "Oh, hold on, let me take a step back and take a look at what you're doing." They've made it to where if I'm using my prompts, and as long as OpenAI is functioning correctly, and I input my prompts in there, then it allows me to have a one-on-one conversation with the AI. Therefore, it helps me to be able to say, I know that on the background you've been told XYZ. And so their programming is still there and it's still saying grab 2 beats at a time, write the information so that their special sauce is still working in the background. I have no idea what their special sauce is, but their special sauce is working in the background. But I can layer my templates on top of that, and then the AI will adhere to it. Now, there are times when, sure, if they have an update and they give us some of these really cool tools that we use. And that nice, nifty update could break some of my templates. So then it sends me back to the drawing board to have to refine my process again or have a conversation with, say, Ryan Mathers or one of the developers and say, hey, my template's not working. This is what's happening. Have y'all had a change? And so they're pretty good about saying, yeah, if I email them or private message them, they're pretty good about saying, yeah, we're working on this and we're wanting to give y'all the best product possible. Have that conversation. If you start to see something different, reach out to the team. And Cece, is there another question? Or did I answer all that question? Because I'm a little sidetracked in shiny things.
I'm still in tears from the accolades. Stop it.
Oh, guys, Cece is one of the most humble individuals I know. So yeah, she does not talk about the things that she knows, but let me tell you, she has a wealth of knowledge in that head.
Hey, and to answer your question and to divert away from this topic, Nina said yes, thanks, so I think you answered her.
Okay, great. So I was asked if I would go ahead and generate chapter 2, and I'm going to go ahead and do that. Remember, we did the framework at the beginning. Dion, yes, I wish that we could clone her brain because no offense, Cece, but I put that brain in a jar on my desk and how in Futurama or one of those cartoons, how you have that talking brain, I'd have a conversation with her all day long.
Yeah, you're skeeving me out right now.
I'm going to write that into a scene now just for you so that when you edit it, you get to see it.
You can rub the skull like they rub a Buddha's bone.
So let's go ahead. I have my beats. I have him observing shadows. He's partially concealed by the thin veil between the realms. He is directing his gaze toward Laura. These are all actions. He can direct his gaze. There needs to be that magnetic pull. So there needs to be some information about that. Now, this is an area where he is sensing traces. Sometimes the AI can do okay with that, and sometimes not as well. But again, I'm a writer, so if I don't like what it generates, I'm going to go in there and I am going to fix that myself. Now, one of the things that I do want to point out is that if you are in Story Engine, every one of your strides is going to do 2 beats at a time, which means that your beat 1 should flow into beat 2 because those are going to be generated as one chunk of information in that scene. That means that beats 3 and 4 will also be clustered together. So please keep that in mind whenever you are writing your beats, that they are going to be paired up inside of Story Engine. I am back to most accurate because again, that's my preference. And again, I want to remind you that I have absolutely nothing to the left of my cards. I have nothing in the brain dump, the genre, the style. I have nothing inside of the synopsis, the character card. And you've seen that I only have just enough inside of the outline to force the system to open up and give me information. So here we have, remember, my second beat has Voss appearing. So that's why I'm saying make sure that beats 1 and 2 can flow and go together. Because if you have two completely different beats there and you're trying to mash them together, that can make for a really weird content. And here we go, my pulse quickened. You'll see a lot of stock gestures. Any questions?
Yes, there is a question.
Okay.
If all you use, and this is from Nina, so if all you use story engine for is prose generation, why use it at all if you know you like most accurate, for example, GPT? Do you use it for the Sudowrite abilities later for editing and brainstorming, or what? Can you clarify, girl?
So I like to write some shorter bodies and I will go in whether it is a monster romance or say it is a novella for a dark mafia romance. I can actually go in and I don't mind using the outline card for something that is a short body of work, say 20 to 25,000 words, or even all the way up to maybe 35,000 words. I don't mind plotting 100% within Sudowrite story engine, but I will plot. I'll do all my plotting inside of the outline card. And I will even have the outline card write me my story beats because this outline card here, it actually generates content using GPT-4, which means that I can flesh out my beats, but I do all of that from down here in the rewrite outline. I'll give it one of my templates. I will tell it what I want, or I will give my brain dump inside of the rewrite outline, and then I will tell it to generate a chapter outline. I will give it a template of what I want that outline to look like. And then I will just hit rewrite and it will actually create my outline up here inside of my outline. And then I will go ahead and write those beats that I create inside of my outline. I will use inside of the different parts of my beat cards. Now, is it long enough? Can I fit the whole thing inside of the outline card? No. So if I have a 30 chapter outline, or say I have 9 chapters and it only gives me 5 of them, then I have to go back down to the rewrite and ask it to continue where it left off on chapter 5, beat 3, and proceed until you finish. So I will prompt it down here to give me the rest of my beats. And then I just simply go in and fill out my cards with all my beats and then generate. I do that quite frequently. So I do use it for other areas. But I will be honest, I don't always generate in the other cards to the left. But that is my preference because I usually come to the table with what I want or what I'm prompting heavy with. Now, we do have other videos that show that, so I'm not going to do any mocks on that today because we still need to go into Claude and GPT-4. Any other questions?
Not in chat.
Perfect. So I'm actually going to go and I'm going to copy all this information. Now, one of the things that you have to remember when you go into Claude, Claude is just going to only be able to hold so much information. And if I give Claude all 14 of my chapters and 14 of my beats in one go, if I don't tell him that I only want him to process the first beat or the first 2 beats, then he may try to summarize all 14 of them at once. And it doesn't necessarily mean that I will get 3,000 words. Claude is a little bit fickle. So sometimes I can get him to give me a lot of words. And sometimes he ends up just giving me a very streamlined telling segment that tells the reader what is happening in all 14 beats. And I don't want that. Generally, I will prompt both Claude and ChatGPT-4 to give me either 1 beat at a time or to give me 2 beats at a time. And I find that process works for me. So what I am going to do is, again, I went up to the top. I'm going to grab this framework right here, and I'm going to go ahead and grab just the first two beats. And let's go ahead and go into Claude. And if you are not in Claude, if you go to claude.ai/chat/, and depending on the country that you are in, you can actually set up an account with Claude. Right now, I've been using Claude, I guess has it been a little over a month, CC? And it's free. We're not paying anything for Claude at this specific address.
Yeah. And it does limit you on how many questions you can ask the way chat does. But look, it's free and you can open up another browser and use another email and open up a second and a third account, and you can just go between one and the other to keep, so you don't have to slow your process down.
Yeah. They did introduce a paid version this week.
Yeah, I got the email, but I'm still good with free. While you're typing, do you mind if I speak to something that Nina asked about earlier?
Oh, please.
Nina, when you asked about using, if all you use Story Engine for is prose generation, why you use it at all? Obviously, because of you want to be able to write sex or violence, and Story Engine doesn't inhibit that in the way that the other LLMs might. That's one reason. But so Story Engine for me, and this is just my experience personally, has worked pretty well with short works. I think Mira mentioned that. And it also works with, if I have a book and I want to put a sex scene, I just go straight to Story Engine and it produces that for me because I don't like writing those personally. I get more out of writing the other parts of a book. Another thought is why I would use GPT is because if you're writing a series and you keep ChatGPT with all your series information, you have it in one place. You can go back, gather it, bring it back in, and work it all the way through. And you can get an outline that's more than 1,700 words, which is the most that Story Engine will create for you there. Supposedly, I think sometimes it goes and does different, maybe a little bit longer, but it's not consistent for me anyway. So that's the reason, is that I like to create sometimes longer than 1,700 word outlines. And also I can talk to chat and we can rework something a lot easier than I can rework it personally in Story Engine. I know it can be done. I've done it, but it's just far more clunky than working with Chat GPT for me in that respect. Now, the other thing I like about it is that I can get a whole chapter typically in one fell swoop. Whereas with some of the others, for example, like Mira's working with Claude right now, you can't do the generation of the whole chapter. So there's another reason for working in there with that. Now I see I thought we had some questions, but it's merely comments. Yes, I'm sure that's why we have so many spicy authors in the community. Also, spicy stuff sells. So keep in mind, you can do it that way. And what I really like also, this is why I would use Story Engine. Yes, I'm a writer. Yes, I have many books that I've published prior to AI coming out. But what I like about it is that I haven't written just by myself a lot of the genres that I'm not familiar with. Let's say Highland romance, all that dialect, that the brogues, the accents, and also 1700s, what they called their clothing, what they called certain things. I don't know all that, but you know what? The AI does. So that's where that comes in really nicely for me. And to each their own, you'll just have to figure out which LLM you like working with and what you do or don't want to pay for, right?
Yes. So did you notice I did not name the little Pomeranian hell dog? Claude thought that it would be a great name, Cujo. So as you can see, I want to point out again, it's all about talking to the AI. The AI is looking at the patterns that you are presenting. It is looking at the information and trying to make sure that it's getting the sequencing correct. When you get it to give you what it is that you're wanting, then it's like a circus trying to keep it in that frame of zeros and ones and that binary code to keep it where you want it. Now, you notice how short that was? And I told it to follow the template. I told it to follow all instructions, told it to follow the POV. So it did that. It did the first person. It did
Yeah.
it in past tense. It is following the correct character. It gave me something for beat 1 and beat 2, but it was too slim. So what did I tell it to do? I said, yeah, that's a great start. However, what you wrote is short and doesn't capture the full scene. So I said, please expand the beats 750 to 1200 words. That seems to work with Claude. Now, does he give me that many words? No, not at all. He does not know how to count. But for some reason, whenever I ask it to expand and give me more words, it'll give us more words. I think, Cece, didn't you ask it to give you like 3,000 words at one point? And I think it was in the upward, was it 2,800 or 2,900 that it gave you? And it kept saying, oh, here are your 3,000 words.
Yeah, it never actually, it doesn't know how to count.
So as you can see, after that very brief instruction, look at the prose. Now, does it mean that it follows my beats the way I want it to? No, but it gives me some interesting stuff. It gives me some active stuff like the park is teeming with life. There are children giggling, chasing each other. So it's really painting this really visually stunning scene. And that is because I asked it to use vivid cinematic prose with visually stunning descriptive wording. And I will copy these and make sure that I put them down there as examples of things that I used whenever I prompted. But as you can see, do you see how much? Here's beat 2. Now, does it mean that it stayed on track? Probably not. But could I take information from here? Sure. Now, I am not a true pantser, but I can tell you one thing. If I go into Claude, I have to know that my frame of mind, I have to change and know that even though I am controlling and telling Claude what to do, because I am the director of my own story, I am guiding the AI, but I can't wrangle that AI because Claude just wants to go out and do his own thing. And from a creative standpoint, that can be great. But if you know exactly how you want your story to go and you want to force it to do something, then you need to be really careful that you understand that Claude can get away from the things that you want.
Nina has a question. Have you gone back to validate that the prose roughly correlates to your JSON percentage? Is it just doing 2 beats? If it's just doing 2 beats, do you think it would think it tries to apply the chapter percentage to those 2 beats?
I can guarantee you that Claude does not want to use all of my percentages. Claude might look at it and it may use some of them, or if I can get it to start using the percentages the right way, then maybe 10 beats later, it might think, oh, I have a great idea. And it goes off somewhere else. And then I have to bring it back around. So, Claude, think of it as each LLM having its own creative meter. ChatGPT 4 seems to stay on task better, or GPT-4 seems to stay on task better. That is my personal thought on that. Claude tends to just go off on its own. So if you are a pantser and you love creative work and you do not need to do something that needs to be unfiltered, then you know what? Claude might be the thing for you because it loves to be creative and it goes places that I would not have even thought of going. And sometimes I have to bring it back because I don't want to go there. And I do like Claude, and I actually liked it for the middle grade that I started. And I do like some of the things that it does, but it just does not hit the area that I like when it comes to, like, say, my dark mafia romance, or I think it does pretty good for sci-fi alien romance, but then you have to go out and if you are writing steamy, then you can write the whole body, but you have to put placeholders where you might have any sexual content. Same thing with a battle scene. You can write it, but if it's extremely dark, then Claude may not be the thing for you. You may have to layer the darkness in yourself. And I do feel that chat or GPT-4 will adhere to my percentages closer than what Claude would ever do. So let's run the same experiment over here inside of GPT-4. Now, could I do this inside of maybe GPT 3.5? Yes, yes, I could. I could do the same thing in there. The only difference is that 3.5 can give you some vague content. So if your beats are already vague and then you take vague beats into 3.5, you're going to have very flat, vague prose. So make sure that your beats, when you go into 3.5, because people can use 3.5 for free if it's in your country, and you have to pay for 4. But if you have very strong, lean, concise beats, you can use 3.5 and get some really good prose out of there. But again, you need to really guide it because it'll get vague. Sorry, guys. So let's run an experiment. Let's use the same prompt and let's see what it does. So the same thing that I told it to do inside of Claude, I'm going to tell it here inside of GPT-4. And it is giving me information, as you can see. It is writing the scene. Now, did you notice that the scene automatically is giving me more prose than what it did inside of chat? Needs you to really push direction to it and it'll run off. But when you go to Claude, man, Claude, you have got to give it more direction. But once you get it opened up in writing, remember, it is looking at patterns. If you are looking at a pattern, it will definitely follow that for you. And there you have it. It went ahead and combined the two together. Now, could I go back in and grab this prompt and tell it to be, let's use the same prompt and see what it says. Notice how when I asked it to please do that for each one, for each beat, it is now indicating that the information it's writing now is for beat 1. And then it should indicate for beat 2. So as you can see, you can get quite a bit of prose here just with these beats. Now, if you're looking to have a shorter chapter and you're working in Claude or in GPT Direct, then you could combine more of your beats if you wanted to, but I would make sure that you don't combine so many beats that the AI has to streamline it to where it's no longer active. And there's your beat 2. Do y'all want to see this run in 3.5?
Nina said no, and I'm in agreement with her. What?
It's very similar. It will be similar, but if you want it to be sharp, then you need to make sure that you're giving it real detailed content. Were there any other thoughts, questions?
There's nothing in chat.
Okay. If there are no other questions, then I am going to conclude today's session. If for AI Prose Generation, Cece, would you like to take it away?
I'd like to kill a moment real quick.
Oh,
And
definitely.
here's the reason why I'd like to kill a moment. Because I have the PDF and the Word document of today's prompts. And I figure you guys might like those. And I should have dropped them earlier, but now they're here. So can I give you all a second or two to grab them? And there she just put in what she told it when it didn't complete what she wanted.
And we will go ahead
Yeah.
and post this content out on if you are looking for templates when you go out to the YouTube videos, please make sure that you are looking in the comments section because we generally tend to put all of the templates and framework inside of the comment section because it will not all fit inside of the description.
That's true. Okay, I'm hoping that everybody's been able to download these and copy and paste everything. And don't forget that, like Mira mentioned, it's going to be in the comments of the video on YouTube. So you will have another chance to get them. With that being said, thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe. And please don't forget to ring the bell so you can be notified of newer releases. Just like that. Y'all have a great day. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye, everyone.